On May 6th, voters in Scotland will go to the polls to decide who will run the Scottish Government, control its purse strings, and set policy for a wide range of public services and a growing list of devolved taxes and benefits. But just how big is the Scottish Government's purse? And how does it spend the money? In 2020-21, the Scottish Government's funding for day-to-day spending on public services and devolved benefits was around £45 billion, or £8,300 per person. This includes almost £10 billion of funding to help address the COVID-19 crisis. Tax devolution means that a growing share of this funding comes from taxes and borrowing powers controlled by the Scottish Government. Over 40p in every £1 of income, aside from temporary COVID funding from Westminster. But funding from the UK Government and UK-wide taxes still makes up most of the Scottish Government's budget. And it's this type of funding that drives the overall level and changes in its budget. It was cuts in UK government funding as part of austerity measures during the early to mid-2010s that saw the Scottish Government's budget for day-to-day spending fall by 6% between 2010 and 2017. And it's increases in UK government funding that explain most of the subsequent rise, with current plans suggesting funding could be 3% above 2010 levels by next year. After kind of a population growth, that's still a 1% cut per person though, so tough choices still lie ahead. Despite this, UK government funding also explains the much higher levels of spending on public services in Scotland. In 2020-21, the Scottish Government's non-COVID funding per person is expected to have been around 30% higher than what is spent on comparable services in England. Nearly all of this is due to higher UK government funding. Devolved tax revenues make up only a minor contribution, in part because the Scottish Government's tax rises have been mostly offset by relatively weak growth in underlying revenues. Spending per person is higher in Scotland than England for virtually all public services. The biggest differences include housing and community development, recreation and culture, environmental protection, adult social services, and transport. Spending on education is also higher in Scotland, with this gap growing over the last decade. More is spent on early years provision, and over 1,000 more per pupil is spent on children aged 3 to 19. Free university tuition for those studying at Scottish universities mean much more upfront spending on higher education, although the eventual difference in spending will be smaller as the cost of writing off unpaid student loans will be lower. The biggest devolved area of spending is health. It too is higher than in England, but official estimates suggest the gap has narrowed significantly over time. Spending was 22% higher per person in 1999 at the outset of devolution, but it was just 10% higher in 2009-10 and just 3% higher by 2019-20. Scottish governments under both Labour and SNP administrations therefore seem to have prioritised increases in health spending to a lesser extent than governments in Westminster. Other areas, including education and social care, have been prioritised more. Devolution, of course, allows the Scottish Government to take a different decision to Westminster. And this is just one of the reasons why the upcoming elections are so important to Scotland's future. Read more analysis at www.ifs.org.uk/Scottish election.